I have only lived in this neighborhood for 10 months, but strange things have been happening lately, and I just don't know how to explain it. I figured I would post here and look for whatever answers might be available. The neighborhood seems normal at first glance. It's a suburban neighborhood built in the early 90s. All the houses are one of 4 possible builds. If you go a few streets over, there are train tracks and some fields of undeveloped land along a freeway. Everything on our street is normal, with one exception. On the far end of my street, in an empty lot at the end of the cul-de-sac, there is a small grove of trees. You might be asking, why are there trees there? Why an empty lot? I have no idea. That's part of the peculiarity. California isn't exactly the cheapest place to live, and land like that is big enough to build a house that might sell for $300,000. Even if it wasn't worth that much in the 90s, it seems weird that the development company would just leave the lot vacant. Even stranger still, there is a small path from the street made of smooth stones. The stones lead into a narrow opening in the grove of trees. If you follow the path into the grove, you will come to a clearing, and at its center is a small ring of stone pillars. I haven't spent much time in the clearing myself, just a quick look into it from the edge of the grove, but the pillars seem to be unadorned and unassuming. My neighbor, who is braver than I am, has gone into the grove and says that along with the stones, fungus grows liberally among the trees at the edge of the clearing. Thankfully, my house doesn't sit along the edge of that lot, but it does seem to be the epicenter of a lot of strange happenings in the neighborhood. The most recent events have upset my life. About 1 month ago, my neighbor Frank was out mowing his lawn. Out of nowhere, he saw a coyote walking down the street and up his yard. That isn't too strange. We do live just a few blocks from the undeveloped grasslands by the freeway. He rushed into his house and got a shotgun, worried about his cats. When he returned to his yard, the coyote was eating from a bag of garbage he had set out on the side of his house, the side that adjoined the undeveloped lot. He shot at the coyote, and he was sure that he hit it. It cried out and limped off into the grove. But when Frank checked, he couldn't find any blood. He tried to follow after it, but the trees grow too close together for an adult to get through, so he tried the path instead. He looked all around the clearing, but he couldn't see anything. I saw Frank later that night while taking a walk around the neighborhood. He relayed to me what had happened that afternoon, but that was when things got even weirder. After that night, Frank stopped coming out of his house except to take trips to the grove. When I saw him one night coming back out, I tried to talk to him, but he just yelled at me to stay away from his house. After that, I tried to steer clear of Frank. He was unhinged when he yelled at me, and he had his fist clenched like he was going to hit me. That was just the start of an off-putting month. Just a few days after that, people started to report that their cats were missing. We have a Ring camera, and we get reports from the website. For the next 2 weeks after the altercation, people from 3 streets around us were posting about their cats not coming home. The first few days, people just kept saying they were probably just out and will be back soon. But after that, everyone started to get worried. I didn't say anything, but I drew a connection in my head between Frank and the missing cats, just because of how close the two things are to each other. Frank's nightly trips continued all month, and I avoided him all the while, until a week ago, when I got a ring at my door. It was Frank. He wasn't mad anymore. When I opened the door, I didn't expect to see him at all, but he was nice enough that I didn't shut the door in his face. He seemed different than before, not as apt to talk about his yard or anything else I tried to bring up. When I asked about his cats, because he doesn't use Ring, he said he got rid of them. He wouldn't elaborate on that any more than to say that they wouldn't be stinking up his house anymore. I was concerned, because he just seemed to be an entirely different person, but at least he was being conversational. And that's when he did something that set all sorts of alarm bells off in my ears. He invited me to a dinner party. At the end of our conversation, he produced this very nicely put together invitation, including an envelope that was sealed in red wax. The dinner was the next night, and he said he invited all the neighbors. I was on the fence about going. The Frank I know would never have gotten rid of his cats, and he definitely would not have invited us over for dinner with just a night's notice and his yard completely unkempt. I talked it over with my wife, who humored my fears, and decided not to go to the dinner party. The next day, we watched as several neighbors all headed over to Frank's house around 6 p.m. In twos and threes, people slowly trickled into his house. I was watching them from my window when about 6:15, Frank came out to welcome the last guests. But before he turned to go, he looked right at me, like he could sense that I was watching him. His gaze sent shivers down my spine. But the worst was that his eyes, reflected in the light from his porch, looked bright yellow. I have never seen that happen in a person before, but that was warning enough. I closed the blinds and retreated to my room at the back of my house. I tried to cheer myself up, so I watched some episodes of Doctor Who and fell asleep. Something must have happened at the dinner party, because everyone who went to the party started to act like Frank. Almost no one went to work the next day, and at around 6:30 p.m., all of the partygoers shuffled down the street toward the grove of trees. I was watering my bushes when I saw them all, a long procession. I turned off my water and went into the house. It was all too much. At 3 a.m., I heard something banging on my front porch. I checked the Ring camera and saw Frank, or at least I thought it was him. What was on the porch confirmed it though. Nailed to the front door was the skin of a dead cat, and written in blood were the words, "Missed you at the dinner party." I called the police, but they were already in the neighborhood. Apparently, the spouses who hadn't gone to the party had already called them because their family members hadn't returned from their walk to the grove that night. Despite looking for them, they couldn't find anything until they brought the dogs in. The dogs took one whiff of a neighbor's clothing and led the police straight to the backyard of Frank's house. There, with some digging, they started to uncover bones. You could see them carting them out, and later on the news, they filled in the gaps. The bones, neatly cleaned, belonged to everyone who attended the party. The only way they could tell was because the clothes the neighbors had worn were still on their bodies. The only things missing were the skin and flesh. On the other side of the yard, they uncovered the bones of 60 cats. The strangest thing of all was that in the far corner of the yard, they found Frank. He was stripped of his skin and flesh. The strangest part? The deterioration of his clothing showed that he had been dead for about a month. The authorities were baffled. They couldn't understand how Frank had been dead, but also seen by so many of the neighbors. It is a mystery. All I know is that every night since the cat was hung up on my door, if I look out my window at twilight, I see Frank standing at the edge of the grove, beckoning me to come and join the dinner party. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you had a good scare or two. And if you did, give this video a thumbs up so we can spread the nightmares around. Stay haunted, my friends. I'll see you next time.